Welcome back, everybody. We're going to get moving along with our next panel discussion. This panel is going to be discussing defining post-warranty O&M strategy. And lucky enough to have today with us Mike Peck, who's the Director of Asset Management at EDP Renewables, Ryan Mcgraw, Head of Asset Management at Orion Renewables, Tracy Jarvis is the GM at Buffalo Wind Farm for AES, E.J. Martin, VP Ops for Firstwind, and Chris Kalinovich, sorry, man. Senior Systems Control Engineer at Transalta. Gentlemen, I'm going to, if you want, I was going to try to move, we're running a little short on time, so then we'll go to the full-blown introductions, if that's okay with everybody. Just a quick discussion points around, again, if folks have questions from the audience, we had some great questions from earlier in the morning. I'd like to continue that forward. If you could please write your questions down, have them on the piece of paper, and have Will Broad will be collecting them and bringing them up to the front. But to kick things off, prior to the discussions that we had last week, the week before, had a few questions. I want everyone to say a couple of words about their organization, talk about the size of their asset base, what kind of O&M philosophy that you guys have. So for the 4 questions I had, I want to say, what's the approximate size of your asset base and the distribution in terms of how many states? What is the predominant theme in terms of your O&M philosophy for your fleet? What % of your fleet is in warranty today? Where do you expect that to be heading? Your role specific to your company, and then your key differentiator where you think you are as an operator. So with that, start at the very end.
Sure. My name is Tracy Jarvis, like I said, with Buffalo Gap Wind Farm in Abilene, a division or a part of the AES wind generation. We have around 1,000 megawatts of wind generation across the U.S. I'm most familiar with the Buffalo Gap site in Abilene. We have about 525 megawatts there. We also have some generation in the East Coast in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Then we also have additional generation on the West Coast, so we're kind of spread across the U.S. For most of our sites, we're self-performing. The Buffalo Gap sites, again, most familiar with, we came out of warranty about 5 years ago now with the first phase, and then the next 2 years after that, we came out of warranty with the other 2. We have one site on the East Coast that still has a parts agreement, but for the most part, everybody else is self-performing. And, what we feel sets us apart as a company is we went out there expecting to be self-performing at the end of the service agreements when we built these projects, because our company philosophy is, our guys in the field know and understand the turbines better, and what it takes to keep them running and have ownership in that. They're always looking for ways to improve reliability. One of our core values of our company is to strive for excellence. So if we see a problem that keeps reoccurring, we don't just slap a new part on it. We try to figure out, what's causing this failure, and if it means improving that part or doing something different as far as operations, our guys are going to be focusing on that. So the flexibility to do that, I understand. Sometimes with OEMs, they don't have that flexibility. We do, and we're going to try stuff and find what works to keep our turbines available.
Great. EJ?
E.J. Martin. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Firstwind. We have just about a gigawatt in the ground. We like to say we're from Maine to Maui. We tend to play in the corners of the country, so we're in the Northeast, the Northwest, and Hawaii, of course. Our O&M theme, I would describe ourselves as getting kicked into the deep end of the pool on self-operating through the Clipper situation. I think somebody mentioned you'd like to have a year. I had 4 months. So we're self-operating our Clipper assets. The remaining assets, we actually take a different approach, and that may be because of a corporate situation where we finance most of our projects, and our lenders like to see long-term agreements with the OEM. So for the remaining part of our portfolio, I'd say roughly 75 to 80%, we're under long-term contracts with the OEM, either from inception of the project or we've extended either in a full wrap or a drivetrain agreement. I think one of the differentiators for Firstwind is that we build in those hard-to-build areas. They're hard to develop, they're hard to construct, and they're certainly hard as hell to operate in. And then innovation. I think somebody up here this morning said they don't want to be the first to test a product. We do. It's bit us in the ass a few times, to be blunt, but I don't want to be handed a white paper and be told I have to trust the work that went into it. GE is a perfect case study where they come to us. They want to run pilot tests on our projects. We let them. We make sure, of course, that we have protection for ourselves, that there's timelines and milestones in place. But at the end of the day, we're able to benefit from a pretty special relationship and get those products first. So to whoever said that, you're welcome.
Good morning, Ryan Mcgraw with Orion Renewables. In terms of development, we've put just over 3,000 megawatts in the ground, but in terms of actual own and management, we manage about 280 megawatts in the Midwest. In terms of our O&M strategy, we typically use ISPs out there, and we purposely have some redundancies in place with those ISPs. So whether it's somebody else who does some remote operations or a third party that comes out and does some work behind them, just to make sure everything's going great. And that's not to say we don't trust them or think they do great work, but we think it's great to have some redundancies in place to check that out. My role with the company is really as head of asset management to protect and optimize the sites, make sure that the operations are high quality, make sure that the contracts are being maintained, and relationships with vendors are where they need to be. And I think one of the key differentiators of Orion is that we really focus on the relationship side of things, and that's sort of throughout the entire process. It's working really hard at the local level to build up a strong presence and relationships there. It's working with the vendors, it's working with the OEMs, it's working with everybody throughout the process so that if a problem comes up down the road, we can move quickly and have a lot of flexibility. And so it really leads to that key point, is the flexibility, the adaptability of Orion to manage projects as best we possibly can.
Let's see. So here's some of the numbers on EDPR in North America. So we have 3,900 megawatts operating currently that we own and operate. It's across 11 states, 5 different OEMs, and 13 different turbine models. Of those 3,900 megawatts, 3,400 are still being maintained by the OEM, and 500 megawatts we've gone with an independent service provider. Roughly 40% of our assets are still under the original warranty, and most of that's going to come out of warranty in the next 5 years. Everything else, the other 60%, is already out of the original warranty. And so my role as Director of Asset Management, I think even in my introduction, it's just this big, broad, sweeping statement because, I actually have to be involved in everything. But, from an O&M perspective, we manage the commercial side of the O&M contract. We are managing and maintaining the relationship with the OEMs from a corporate perspective. And so with that, it's our job to lead the cross-functional teams within EDPR to ensure that we drive the performance. So understanding what's the technical perspective, what's the commercial perspective, what are all the other obligations that might be affected, like landowners, power purchase agreements, your interconnect agreement, managing all those contracts. In addition, because I'm responsible and my group's responsible for managing those the O&M contract, we also are the ones that negotiate the O&M contracts once you get past the initial procurement stage. And as far as what I think is EDPR's advantages, I think the fact that we're a global company is a big advantage. We have a large asset base and years of operating experience. While I'm not responsible for anything more than North America, we certainly collaborate with our colleagues across the pond, as we say. And so there's a lot of installed base in the Iberian Peninsula and other countries throughout the European Union, and we also have assets in Brazil. So we do collaborate internally, understanding what the performance is. across our fleet and getting commonalities. When we have an issue on turbine model X, we see where it is across our entire global fleet, and we also, when it comes to managing our relationships with the OEMs, we certainly manage it from a global perspective as well. So in addition to that, I think that our performance analysis is second to none. We have a lot invested into our capabilities to analyze and to drive the performance of our assets.
Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Kalinovich from Transalta. We've got about 1,000 megawatts of wind spread out over 4 provinces in Canada. We're the largest IPP within Canada, spread out over about 7 different turbine technologies, from the earliest commercial wind farm in Canada to the most recent. New Richmond just went COD a couple of weeks ago. Our philosophy for O&M generally leans in-house. That being said, we've got 25% with long-term contracts with Vestas and Enercon right now. So it all depends on the situation. We've got a couple of nodes across the country. With Alberta, we've got a lot of sites where we can really leverage our expertise across a couple of different platforms and share teams, as well as in Quebec and Ontario, where we can share resources. I think a big part of what differentiates us and why we try to take stuff in-house is the corporate assets that we can rely on and the expertise built up over time. We've got a lot of coal, gas, and hydro assets as well, so we've got a lot of metallurgical engineers, rotating equipment specialists that we can draw on for a lot of the issues that we see. So that's, I think that's why we try to take most things in-house that we can, but again, discussions with the vendors.
Great. So first thing I wanted to touch upon, we didn't get too much into this in the last couple of sessions, some of the questions that I posed to you gentlemen a couple of weeks ago. First thing I want to talk about is the scheduled part of the maintenance program. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there were some discussions around how do we improve that. Eventually you do hit some type of a floor. You have to have folks out there, you have to have trucks out there, you have to have tools out there. What are some of the ways that you guys are looking at to try to improve the cost performance of scheduled maintenance? I want to start at the end, Tracy, if you can.
Yep, that's one area that, again, I think with the flexibility that we have, we've been able to reduce the amount of turbine downtime due to scheduled maintenances. We start with the OEM recommended checklist, and then we get some feedback, from maybe a specialist in torquing and tensioning or gearbox maintenance. Maybe go to the manufacturer and say, does this really need to be done every 6 months? Can it be done annually or even every couple of years? So we went through and analyzed that. The technicians themselves came back with some questions, and we're changing a little filter. It's a $5 filter, but the checklist said change it every 6 months. Well, they're pulling it out and it's still clean. They're like, why are we doing this? So feedback from the guys out in the field, feedback from specialists. We've been able to, trim that down so that we're not taking the turbines offline as much as, originally. The other thing that we do is we probably are unique in the fact that we have a planner. We actually have a gentleman that, he's our planner scheduler. So when we're putting together work orders for the next 2-3 weeks, he's looking at weather, he's looking at wind speeds, and changing our schedule around based off of forecast. So we're not taking a turbine offline to do maintenance. If the winds are blowing good, we'll push it out. We still have a window to get everything completed in, but we take advantage of the wind and catch the generation when it's there.
EJ?
I think a lot of us are going to have the same answers here, but certainly fine-tuning the O&M maintenance manual itself. I think you have to be a little careful there and that you don't get overzealous. We all certainly try to do our maintenance during the low wind periods, and rushing the scheduled maintenance can really bite you in the rear end later on if your techs aren't taking care of business. As far as reducing costs, again, I don't think there's anything earth-shattering, but we have a roaming team that's our QA/QC team that helps out in construction, but allows us a separate labor pool to pull from. So I don't have to have so many techs at the site Certainly the guys at the site are going to run that maintenance program because they own the turbines. I want them to feel like they're theirs. But to be able to bring in 2 extra people to do the torque and tensioning, which we know is the most labor-intensive part of most maintenance cycles, really helps keep the cost down rather than feeding those 2 additional heads at every single project. And then the same holds true with regional tooling. If you can have a planner that can schedule that sort of stuff and you can move stuff around the country, there's a huge potential for cost savings. And you spoke about the flexibility as far as doing it yourself. You know, I think most of us see it both ways. The one thing I would recommend is if you do consider extending, whether it's with an ISP or an OEM, insist upon a production availability. I think the period of time-based availability is dead in this industry. And certainly if you have a bonus that's incentivized around how much you make at the end of the year, we've certainly realized a huge paradigm shift in the way, even at the tech level, they're thinking about, okay, it's blowing at 50% of nameplate. We're not going to take this down today because we want that extra cheddar at the end of the year.
Right?
Sorry. So this is a question we've actually considered from 2 perspectives. One from our installed asset base and one from our development base. How do we drive down costs in our pro formas going forward as well? And from our installed asset base, it's actually a lot of what you've already heard. It's going through the OEM checklists and making sure we're doing what we need to do. But the fact is, since we're out of warranty on a lot of these things, we have a lot of flexibility to try to find new ways, use new technologies, new trends to try to bring down costs. So that might be, doing our maintenances at different times a year, making sure we're maximizing on doing our scheduled maintenances during periods of low wind, doing some condition-based monitoring where if we, are up tower or, near a turbine where we think there might be an issue, even if it's not scheduled for maintenance anytime shortly, maybe we go do the scheduled maintenance now. So those are some of the things with our installed asset base. But with new development projects, one thing we've been doing, when possible, is looking to see if we can standardize our fleets. So whether or not that's in geographic range, whether we're building near other plants so we can get economies of scale with our operators, or whether or not it's with our fleet of wind turbines, if applicable. Obviously, you have to use your best capacity factor for every site, but if it's possible to use the same thing, then great. And that being said, also at multiple wind farms, trying to sort of mirror the BOP, whatever the EPC might be going on site, so that way you have the same general layout, so your operators, if needed, can move from site to site and help you out.
Okay. Mike?
I was just jotting down some ideas. So a lot of these will be just our observation and working with the OEMs and the ISPs for what we've done. But first, I think that there's 2 ways to look at it. You want to limit your availability and your energy loss, and so there's some few ways to do that. First and foremost, EDPR has tried to the best of their ability to get to contractual energy-based availability to make sure that we're aligned so that we're not fighting at the site level to do exactly what Tracy said, and that was schedule around the wind. For those of us who own the assets, we're in the business of generating power so we can sell it and make money, not collect availability LDs that are based on some time-based. I think that the SCADAs are capable of calculating energy losses, and so there's no reason not to use that to make sure you're contractually aligned. In addition to that, I think that getting the site operating in an efficient and lean type schedule, a great example, one of our OEMs, they brought on a site manager it was one of our lower performing sites across that particular OEM's fleet, and in 2 years turned it around to be one of the top performing. And we actually had a celebration party with the landowners and everything. And one of the keys was the guy, the site manager for the OEM, had experience doing lean in a other industry. I think it was the car industry. And he came in and he had the parking space, the truck, the guys on the board, all color-coded. This is your team, Team 1, Team 2, Team 3. And they come in the morning, and they had an inventory guy or a warehouseman that had exactly the tool bag and the I think, as Craig mentioned, the kitting ready to go. So those guys come in the morning, don't even go inside. They just have the tailgate meeting, bam, you're off to the turbine. And considering a lot of the wind farms in the U.S. anyways are huge, and it takes you half an hour, 45 minutes just to get to that turbine. Well, if you don't have the right part or the right tool, you're turning right back around, and it's an hour and a half round trip just to get what you need, let alone you just went up tower and climbed, and then you had to go back down. So getting those guys operating on a lean, efficient type manner completely turned that side around, and we were really appreciative, and we had lessons learned, and it's something that EDPR is looking to roll out across their fleet, figure out ways to get the service providers to get a lean process going. Other than that, making sure you have adequate parts, the inventory. Some of the providers have like a milk run that's a regular going across the country. Others have, centralized, and they can get it there FedEx or whatever within 48 hours commitment. So you can look at whether it really makes sense, even if just to help yourself as the asset owner, should I stock parts at my site to make sure that just in case the OEM doesn't have, or your service provider doesn't have them, does it benefit me to have that? And then other than that, limiting your energy loss, I think that reducing the man hours and your parts cost to the best of your ability. And as Tracy mentioned, we've seen some OEMs go to a condition-based maintenance, and EDPR is 100% behind that. It totally makes sense. You don't need to change that X because the schedule says so. Can you let it run longer? And so it takes a lot of engineering support to make sure that that's a good decision. As the owner, well, I want to make sure that I really can go another 6 months or another year. I understand the benefit of reducing the man hours and the cost of using parts, but I want to make sure that my turbine really is going to be reliable. So we kind of tread lightly, or take it, not tread lightly, we take it very seriously, that evaluation before we go to condition-based maintenance. And then the last I had was staffing efficiency. We've seen the service providers ensure that they have a local, like Tiger technical team ready to go to reset faulted turbines, but if they can, use regional teams of guys to do the scheduled maintenance. And so they're able to cut down on staffing costs that way.
Well, my area that I look at for Transalta is skate and control systems, and that's oftentimes one of the last thoughts for scheduled maintenance. Where we're seeing, especially with our older assets, is the plan was not in place to deal with them, especially when you're talking IT hardware, servers, computers, whatnot. We're still running Windows 2000 boxes, some stuff from 5-6 years old, which is well past its lifetime. It's still running at times, but it's an exposure that we have in terms of getting them replaced in a timely basis and catching failures before they happen. It's something we've been working with GE. We're working with Vesta still on some solutions to some issues we have from our older sites. But specifically when you look at out of warranty sites with no vendor support, that's where we're starting to look at some third-party solutions for replacing hardware that's existing and not functioning or not replaceable, just to get it back up to the corporate standard that we have for visibility.
Great. Now, another question in terms of buying behavior. This is more on the strategic assets. So with respect to strategic components, one of the things that we're seeing a good deal of these days is the movement from transactional-based service interactions with gearbox repair, generator repair, blade repair, into more strategic frame agreements of sorts. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Do you feel that that is a beneficial market dynamic? Do you think it needs to be grown further out? What are folks out there in the component and/or strategic component repair part of the marketplace? What do they need to do to try to improve the relationships with you folks and get a better cost, better visibility in terms of your needs? And I would actually start on this end too.
I think it ties in again to the server side I was talking about there. We are looking again to leverage what sort of resources we have in-house there, where we don't need to necessarily go for a whole rack, just give us a new server rack, replace it. Look at piecemeal replacement for hardware parts, give us some visibility into what we can and look at ourselves without necessarily going into the whole deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that I think the key is the asset. You need to look at it from the other side and understand what it really actually costs to hold those capital spares. Because what we want is, well, when the gearbox fails, well, we want the latest and greatest, the best one that's out there, and we want it now. And now. And but realistically, it costs money to keep that. And so we've certainly looked at some of the component manufacturers will store your capital spare for you. And that's certainly something to look at. But then you also have to look at what your failure rates are. and weigh that against the supply and demand. Depending on your turbine type, there might be usually plenty of availability on the spot market, if you will, for those components. And so in discussing those things, typically who's going to provide that for you, they want a commitment for how many you're going to buy, how often. It goes into the whole pricing issue. So I would think that as much as I understand that, and I agree that that's something you have to factor, perhaps if you're big enough to serve everybody in the industry, maybe it's like, I don't know, for lack of a better comparison, like Walmart. I mean, everybody's coming into your store. You're going to be able to move the inventory off your shelf. So hopefully that premium doesn't get passed down to the owners. That's all I can think of.
So the emerging specialty market, if you will, is something that Orion's actually pretty excited about. I think one thing you need to do ahead of time is understand what your risk is, and then know which vendors you need to go to that have that specialization to address it, right? So take, for instance, one of our wind farms we're contracted where we have gearbox exposure. So one thing we can do, go find somebody with gearbox specialty and develop that relationship early. And so what that allows us to do, even if we don't have a problem today, we might have a problem tomorrow. And so if we have a framework in place where that gearbox can be provided to us, then we know, timing, how quick it's going to get to site, how quickly we can get it up. We'll probably have some sort of transportation agreement in place to do so. And the big key factor is we're going to have cost certainty, because we're going to know what it's going to cost to get that gearbox from point A to point B and up tower. And so, that's just one example, but there's a lot of these emerging specialties coming in all throughout the market. And something, again, not being perhaps widely employed yet, but the relationship building part of it is really important to us.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can improve much on that answer because that was pretty much what I was going to say. The one caveat I would add is that when we negotiate these types of deals, we do them based on volume and a non-exclusive agreement. The last thing you want to do, even though on your P&L it looks great because you have that certain line, is lock yourself into a 3-year agreement and the bottom falls out of the market and you're stuck buying these parts at an elevated cost. So you don't get what you should. You get what you negotiate. So that's you got to go into those things with kind of one hand held behind your back kind of situation.
Tracy?
Yep. I guess our strategy kind of evolved over the past 4 years. When our first project started preparing to come out of warranty, at that time, if you went to look for a gearbox or a generator, you were looking at year and a half lead time to get that. So, we were, I wouldn't say a panic mode, but we wanted to make sure we had some spare parts available when we did come out of warranty. So we went ahead and purchased, some spares. We worked out a deal with the manufacturer that they kept them, they maintained them, and, when we needed them, we called them up and they'd ship them. Then 2008 occurred, and the market improved greatly for spare parts. So with the newer projects that came out of warranty, we actually, just kind of a spot market. We go to the manufacturer and, get a quote, compare, do the cost analysis, and for the most part, they were readily available. Again, it continues to evolve. What we do now is we have a, set of spares basically floating in and out of the turbines. So we take one out, we send it to a shop, have rebuilt, particularly in some cases, generators. There's some upgrades that we're doing to that generator so that we're beefing it up, and it comes back on the shelf and is available to go back in the turbines at that time.
Yeah, I think also you have to value, I'd mentioned all that I'd said before about what's the premium you're willing to pay to have that capital spares available. You need to offset what's your other alternative. You can have business interruption insurance to offset that so you can stop the bleeding after a while. And that's certainly, you have to value that in to how much you're actually going to lose, and that pretty much caps at what the premium is you're willing to pay.
One thing I wanted to touch upon also was remote operations. We've heard from a couple of folks today at different times, some discussions around the potential of outsourcing remote operations. Some folks are better set up than others. To the point, if you have existing thermal assets or something along those lines, there's the possibility there to bolt that on in terms of your wind portfolio. But how are you folks looking at remote operations at this point? Is this something you want to keep in-house? Is it something you would consider outsourcing to a third party, whether it be the OEM or just someone completely different? outside of the OEM? I'm curious where folks see the market heading in terms of remote operations. And EJ, I think you want to start there.
Yeah, so we do all of our, we have, where we have contracts with the OEM, they have their remote monitoring. They want to maintain that for their warranty provisions, which is fine. But we have our own remote monitoring center in Boston with a failover in California in case there's ever a blizzard or something like that and people can't get there. For us, one, we want to control the data that comes in so that we can fact check the data that's getting reported to us by the OEM. And if you're not doing that, it's hard to QA, QC that, just like you have to QA, QC the inspections. One of the larger concerns for me is actually on the NERC-FERC side. We have the dubious honor of being both a GO and a TO-TOP. I don't know if you guys know much about that, but on the transmission side, it's a whole different world than being a generator. And you can't contract away that responsibility. You can try like hell, but you believe me, I've sat in multiple rooms with multiple regulators and had this discussion. You just can't. So if you hire somebody and they screw up, NERC's still coming after you. And so it really comes down to, do you want to kind of control your own destiny, or do you want to try to manage somebody else? And for us, we want to manage it ourselves.
Right?
So I think the 24/7 remote operations has to happen, and like you just heard, I think OEMs, ISPs, whoever it might be, have that capability themselves. Orion ourselves, we're too small to go ahead and actually have our own remote operations center, but what we do is we want to have a redundancy in place, so we do contract out to a third party that also has some remote operations, and it's a lot of, as you said, data checking, fact checking, making sure everything is as they say it is on site. And for the most part, we've never had an issue, but it's one of those things that we want to have that redundancy in place just to see what's going on.
Yeah, I just echo both of these guys. I think that EDPR certainly has remote control capabilities. We have a remote control center in our Houston office. It's staffed 24/7, and as far as the performance of the OEM, we do, even if you're under warranty and the OEM has a responsibility for monitoring and resetting those turbines, we're still looking. We have constant contact. If that turbine's been down, we mark it. Middle of the night, 30 minutes goes by, we're calling whoever at the OEM to ask them, hey, what are we doing about this turbine? Can we get it reset? What's the status? Just making sure that we're all on the same page. But I think that more importantly is the regulatory obligations. Absolutely, as a generation owner, and thank God we're not transmission owners or operators.
It's a rough life.
Yeah, it must be. But we have a responsibility to the reliability of the North American grid to make sure that we are not affecting the system and that we're playing by the rules. And so we absolutely take our regulatory compliance very seriously. And by centralizing it in Houston and running it through getting it so that all the communications are going through your remote ops center, it really actually helps you save a whole bunch of money and time when you're having to go through your audits. So there's a NERC audit that comes around every few years for your asset, and you normally spend a bunch of time trying to scramble, get documents if you weren't organized, from what's at the site and who knows this and who knows that. So now it's a lot easier to have all that tracked in databases and things that are run by our remote ops center. And it also, when you're in the middle of an event, it allows your site teams to free up to go out and actually troubleshoot and solve the problem. And our remote ops guys can take the responsibility of doing the communications with the OEM or the local authorities or whatever. It's even running stuff like the safety of the guys that are out there. We're watching the weather all day long. We see those storms coming through, the alarms go off, we're calling the site. I know the service providers have it too, but we're looking just in case. And so it's just another set of eyeballs to make sure we're all safe and that we're all doing the best we can on our wind farms.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that too is, so we looked at outsourcing, and we didn't have a remote center for a while. And one of the larger fears I would also have beyond the NERC and FERC stuff would be, a transmission owner calls you and they say, hey, I need you to open V112, and it's an outsourced remote operator, and they don't know what breaker that is. They're not familiar with your balance of plant system, perhaps. They're only familiar with the turbines. That's going to cause you a relationship issue that could cost you real money when you get down to your PPA and your interconnection agreement.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, with Transalta, we've had a remote control center down in southern Alberta for coming on 2 years now. Before that, it was trying to play catch-up. Site operators covering after hours, some of the thermal assets trying to do it as well, and it didn't really work out that well. Good points you guys have about centralizing it so it catches everything. Our guys down in southern Alberta, they monitor sites across Canada, but we're seeing a lot of really kind of interesting work going on together, having the guys actually right at a site that's in the center of, I guess, the majority of our parks. There's a lot of learning back and forth with the operators, seeing stuff because they're watching the turbines day in, day out. They catch stuff that the techs don't always do. So they're sharing information as the techs are coming through the office, and the techs are seeing stuff that's passing back to the operators. So that's just a consideration as well, though there's benefits to having it centralized, which, again, we monitor across the country, but you get some extra learning opportunities having it at the same site as well.
This was a really great question from the audience, and actually built on a prior question that I had built in for you guys. The question comes from concept basically that you have a operator that has a large portfolio of assets. They are looking and shopping around, basically trying to understand what they should do moving forward. OEMs are offering bumper-to-bumper warranties these days, 10 to 15 years in some circumstances. And one of the issues that we have seen as well from my crew is that folks simply are very afraid of that they do not have the correct assumptions in their pro forma for unscheduled maintenance, and as a consequence feel almost beholden to the OEM to just say, you know what, I just don't know what the hell's going on here, I got to go with these guys. Do you guys, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, you know, managing that risk, and how on earth can you actually move forward in terms of trying to better understand what real failure modes are across the North American market? Tracy, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably the $1,000,000 question. It's
Literally.
something
Literally.
multi-$1,000,000. And it's something that when we first started looking at self-operating, we really didn't have a good handle or even a really good idea where to start. So we reached out to other owners in the area and kind of polled them. We looked at the history that the OEMs had for the time that they were there, and kind of tried to develop, hey, we expect to have this number of gearboxes or generators over a period of time, annually, and then budget around that. Now that we've been running for a few years, we have some history that kind of helps support that. But what we're finding also is, again, as the expectation would be, as the sites age and the components age, get more runtime on them, it's not a flat line or anything like that and expect X number of failures per year. So we're doing a little more in-depth studies. There's a lot more tools out there. We're talking to specialized service providers that do continuous base monitoring or can analyze information that we already have and help us to develop WIBO analysis, so that we're putting a little more science behind it. Quite honestly, in the past it's been guesstimate, but there's more tools out there available to us now, and we're getting more familiar with them. And I think they've evolved also and gotten more into the wind turbine components, so that now we're taking stuff that maybe an automotive company's been doing for years and applying it to a wind turbine to help figure out what's going to happen in the future, looking at crystal ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise it's certainly a surprise, but I think everybody in the room would agree that O&M costs are projected to be a lot higher than initially everybody thought they were going to be 5 years ago. The decision to move, whether you go into the long-term OEM agreement or go to self-operating, a large driver for us, I mentioned this earlier, is the fact that we finance all of our agreements. So yes, you're going to pay some premium for that full coverage, but if you can go to your stakeholders and your future stakeholders as you develop more projects and say, year on year, our costs have been where we expected them to be and we've returned exactly what we said we were going to, you're able to finance more projects so you can put more steel on the ground. That's probably that's been hard for me as an O&M guy, because I want to go after every single efficiency. But that's the reality of the business situation, is if you can flatten out your P&L, you can do more.
Great point. And sorry, the the unscheduled piece of this, the failure modes are by far the scariest part of the operations of maintenance ownership. But it's sort of as Tracy was saying, there's a lot of science you can do these days to try to figure out where you might fall. Whether that's looking at industry trends, talking with people in the industry, that sort of thing. But then what you need to do, once you have sort of those industry level specs, take that and look at your own site. And, are you in a colder place? Do you have more shear? What might it be that would cause you to have more or less stress on a turbine? Make your own adjustments from that standpoint. And then at that point, evaluate your own risk. And risk not necessarily just being your economic risk. You need to also look at your contractual risk. If I lose, 3 turbines this year due to a gearbox, am I going to meet PPA requirements? Those are the sort of things you need to always be looking down the road at. So it's, understanding your site and your risk. And then I think potentially one of the more important pieces of this, and it actually goes a lot to the financing, is communicating your risks. And that's, internal. You need to make sure everybody inside the organization understands what might happen and how you're going to address it if the worst comes to pass. That's point number 1. But point number 2, and especially important for potentially developers who work a lot with financing outside of the organization, is talking with your investors, with your financial partners, and letting them know, we might have 5 gearbox failures this year. We haven't had any the past 3 years, but we might have a terrible year this year. And if that's the case, we're not going to hit our pro forma. And here's why, X, Y, and Z. This is what we project the cost might be. And just have that discussion early. So when it comes to pass, if it comes to pass, everybody's ready for that discussion. And that will actually allow you, as EJ was saying, to keep financing projects down the road, even if you run into these problems.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure how much more I can add to all that, but I agree with all of it. And I think the key is you got to get smart. And it takes years to get there. You have to have been developing a team internally, engineers, analysts, to understand what your risks are from a technical perspective on your major components, understanding what the defects are, what you can get contractual coverage, extended coverage for, what you can't. It's a very, very complex decision of how you're going to go, and all the different factors that they just named off, your other contracts, and you have investors. Part of getting smart is learning from your industry, learning from those investors. They know a lot. And they're going to tell you whether the risk is acceptable to them or not. And so working through all those iterations and all those analyses over years to get there, and then specifically on a case-by-case, is just paramount to the whole decision. And I think one other thing would be, I think the industry's sometimes forced the owners into looking for alternatives. So I know that for us, we were getting full price offers or full wrap offers that were well above our model, and I got to get something else. I got to figure out something else. And so we were able to go to the market in Europe and in the United States and force the issue. And you were able to break out the components that I listed in my previous slide, and that's service and maintenance, small parts correctives, major components. Are you willing to take on some of that risk? Can you contract for a portion of it? You don't have to self-perform. I know that EDPR, we're not planning on self-performing anytime soon. That's a big thing you have to take on, but then you never know. Maybe you're going to be forced into it. What happens if another OEM goes out of business or goes bankrupt? You might be forced to have to make these choices, and so you have to be doing all that you can now to learn about your asset and what's it going to take. And I think that the worst case scenarios certainly go through our minds, and we figure out how we're going to prepare for that.
Chris? Not much else I can add to all that.
Okay. With another question with respect to the way the market is heading in terms of different types of agreements, 2 things I want to tackle here. With respect to, one, do you see that there is flexibility, directly to Mike's point, in the ability to carve out specific areas of turbine maintenance on a contractual basis with the turbine OEMs and or ISPs for that matter? Mm-hmm. And then secondary to that is, do you see, along with the energy-based guarantees, is there a pay for performance piece that is becoming more widely accepted within the space in terms of dollars on a per kilowatt hour basis versus a standard contractual rate? So a base fee plus a pay for performance. and
Yeah,
Chris and Tom.
I think that's critical to have that sort of flexibility. I really like what the Vestas guys were saying this morning about how they can start breaking out some stuff, and that's obviously what we're looking for from the control side. It's leave it to the other guys to discuss more of the gearbox, the bigger picture issues. But for what I like to see, yeah, I need to see some flexibility for an ongoing support. If it's a replacement of server hardware, it's support for troubleshooting issues that we can't handle internally. Yeah, we need to see that sort of flexibility.
Yeah, I think, well, we certainly have all different flavors of contracts, and I know that it exists. I know that it's possible, whether it be the OEMs who offer specific coverage versus the full wrap, and also with the independent service price. So I know that it exists because we have it. And then with regards to your question about variable pricing, me personally, I just want the fixed fee. And I also don't want the service provider taking on wind risk. I think that's my risk. But I do want them to be aligned with me in what makes me money, and therefore energy availability is my preference of how you get there.
Right.
Love the flexibility that I've seen recently in the markets. We went through some renewals on contracts, and one of the things that really jumped out at me was sort of the suite of options that was available these days. It's everything from a full wrap to only scheduled maintenance and everything in between. People were willing to take risk on just the consumables for scheduled maintenances. They were willing to take risk on all parts, on the drivetrain, on the full wrap of everything. So there is a deal out there for everybody, which is important, and it really comes down to, again, understanding your risks and putting those in a line item and figuring out what it is you're willing to pay for, whether it's through insurance or self-insurance or a warranty or whatever it might be, finding a way to make it work for your company and your site. So the flexibility itself is wonderful. Love that right now. The pay for performance, really important. I think it does align the goals of everybody. It's something that, frankly, has kind of scared us, to be honest, because being newer with these renewals, we saw it as, I don't really want to give up a price per kilowatt hour for my O&M, but once you get comfortable with it, all it really means is once you're in the money, you split the money, and there's a lot of value to that. So don't be afraid of going that route if you get there.
Yeah, on the flexibility, I mean, I would echo what all these guys have said. Don't be afraid to ask. If you don't ask, you're never going to know. But the onerous is really on you as you develop your RFP to know what you want. If you just say, hey, I want you to operate the turbines, you're going to get the standard offering. On the pay for performance, I agree with you. It's about being open. I think that's one thing I've noticed, at least with the people we do business with, is that 5 years ago, everything was a closely guarded secret. Nobody really played well in the sandbox. I didn't trust you. He didn't trust him. It was a bit of a mess, to be honest. And now when we sit down for these contract negotiations, we are having discussions of, here's my P50 number, here's my P80 number, here's where the site's performed for the last 5 years, here's what I get per megawatt. I mean, we do have those discussions because when you go to a pay-for-performance metric, even at the OEM level, I think that, yeah, they get a nice bonus, but down at the site level, you're talking very short money for a very real change in perception. A tech who makes $55,000 a year getting a $3,000 bonus, that's a lot of cash. But overall, the impact to your project is very small, but he cares more. He's coming to work every day. He's excited. He's asking about the statistics. How's the site running? Where are we at? Why is that turbine down? We just care more.
Yeah, at the site level, we really haven't entertained any proposals. So it's interesting to hear that they're out on the, they're out there in the market now available to us. A few years ago when we approached the OEMs, because we did do that, we went to each OEM before we, determined that we wanted to self-perform. Give us a quote, give us what can you guys do this work for? What's it going to cost us? And quite honestly, we got the standard. Here's what it is. We did have one OEM that was, pretty creative. They did roll in the, based on production. That was pretty encouraging. But at the time, we went ahead and decided to go with the self-perform. But, it sounds like there's an opportunity, for newer businesses or places that are coming out of warranty to entertain that proposal. It sounds like the options are there now. And, with the self-perform, there are some of the the HR issues. That's one thing that, as a self-performer, we spend a lot of time dealing with personnel issues. If you have if you're paying somebody else to do it, they take care of that. So there's a lot of this gray hair that I have comes from the personnel issues. So.
Okay, great. So with that, we're definitely running a bit behind, so I want to wrap things up now, but a couple of questions we weren't able to get to. I apologize for that. But thanks again for the great questions from the audience and fantastic answers by the panelists. So thank you very much, guys, for your time today.